Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's IT Pro Today webcast, How Scale Out Converged Architectures Solves Data Protection and Storage Challenges, sponsored by StorageCraft. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help widget on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. If at any time you're having audio difficulties or issues with advancing of the slides, please hit your F5 key to refresh your webcast console. Today's web seminar is being recorded and will be available on demand for 12 months starting tomorrow. You'll receive an email when it is ready. And with that, let's meet today's speakers. Bill Clayman is a contributing editor for IT Pro Today, and in using the latest innovations such as AI, machine learning, and cloud and advanced technologies, Bill delivers solutions to customers that help them achieve their business goals and remain competitive in the market. Sean Darrington is the Senior Director of Product Management at StorageCraft with more than 20 years of storage experience. Sean has held multiple product marketing and management positions covering storage management, cloud, and virtualization solutions. And with that, the floor is now yours, Bill.
Thank you so much, Jen, and welcome everybody to another really fun webinar that we're going to be talking about today. So how scale-out converged architecture can solve data protection and storage challenges. I'm genuinely excited about these kinds of conversations, but today is really special because we get a chance to talk about something that's really, really important. Everyone listening, you guys sitting in front of your machine, your computer, your iPad, we are walking, talking, data-generating engines. Sometimes we sit and generate data as well, but a lot of times we're very, very mobile people. And it's really critical to understand, and I kind of want to set the lay of the land here before we jump into the topic too much, that we're creating a lot of data every single day, and this stuff, this information that we create, it's not benign. It's genuinely valuable to people and how we process and then make decisions, and certainly how we go about our lives. And the amount of information that we create on a daily and even the hour basis continues to grow. And here's the thing. This is the most important part. We'll get into this in just a second. Not all data is created equally. And things like unstructured data are creating massive challenges for people like service providers and customers. In fact, there was a really interesting report recently that showed that for service providers, they are being absolutely inundated with all of this unstructured data. And they've reported annual growth rates of 60 to 80%, again, a year in terms of how much unstructured data more they're seeing all of this time. So all of this data comes from so many new sources, and it opens up things like risks, right? The sensitive information, how we store and protect this data. So we have to make sure that this information isn't only secure, but it's also resilient. So with the influx of VMs and data points and certainly distributed users, all of you guys, we have to ensure performance, uptime, and that these situations aren't actually serious challenges. So how do you protect all these VMs? How do you deal with all of this unstructured data, all of this new information? That is what we're going to be talking about today. Like data growth, we'll talk about unstructured data, this digital inflection point that every single person on this webinar, including you guys listening, are experiencing today. We'll talk about some new solutions as far as performance, security, resilience, leveraging new architectures to enable your digital business, and obviously we'll talk about some best practices. Now, I'm really excited to bring Sean into the conversation here in just a little bit. He's going to be doing a little bit of a presentation as well as a little bit of a mini demo. Now, that being said, both Sean and I, listen, we love an interactive audience. We really do. So if you have any questions or comments or concerns, you know what, just go ahead and pop that into the Q&A. We are going to have a good 10 to 15 minutes at the end here to talk about this. Listen, if you have data concerns, rebuilding an infrastructure, anything along those lines, go ahead and ask us those questions, and we're going to get a chance to talk about it. But let's dive in a little bit. So, you know, we talk about the creation of data. We talk about all these new kinds of applications in the cloud, but we really want to quantify all of this, right? By 2024, it's expected that data stored in the data center to be more than double the data stored at the endpoint, completely reversing the dynamic from just a few years ago. And again, we're seeing this global data sphere continue to grow from 33 to 175 zettabytes by 2025. And again, CEOs are finding ways to capitalize on this stuff. They're using data, and it's a whole part of this digital transformation effort where they're spending about $1 out of every $3 by 2021 on a concentrated effort to work with data and information. And all of this comes from a very, very quickly changing world. Now, if there's one slide that you're going to listen and you're going to pay attention to, it should be this one. When you take a look at our world, right, everything that we see in this architecture, we need to take a look at this inflection point that we're all experiencing. How over the next 3 to 4 years, digital transformation efforts will no longer be projects or initiatives. They're going to be the way we think, the way we operate, the way we do things every single day. Again, we're all becoming digital natives, right? And it's, again, the way we attack our customers, go after new kinds of markets, use data to actually do great things in our industry and in our world. And again, this is not going to slow down, it's not going to change, and it's only going to accelerate in pace. Now, that being said, remember what I mentioned earlier, right? No data, or data is certainly not created equally. And there's going to be a lot of different kinds of things out there to consider. Now, I'm going to apologize in advance for these next 4 slides. They're going to be a little bit wordy, but again, you are going to be able to download this presentation. So if you need to pause or slow down on any of these, by all means, go ahead and do so. But again, there's different kinds of data, and certainly different kinds of data sources. So first of all, we've got something called embedded data, where by 2025, it's going to constitute about nearly 20% of all data created. And so we're talking like IoT, building automation, machine tools, RFID readers, chip cards, and so much more. And there's a lot of this stuff that's being created, and it's a big contributor to data growth in our present era. And again, where some of these differentiation points come up, all of this data, all this embedded devices are fueling the growth for things like metadata, obviously big data and applications, and so on. The other type of data that's really, really important is going to be productivity data. So think of like PCs, servers, phones, tablets, right? We continue to see this rise as well, where connected users will number 75% of the world's population by 2025, and they're all going to be creating all of this information. Again, young people, older people, whatever the case might be, emerging markets were once sort of silent and dormant are going to become digitally connected. And all of this creates something that we know as unstructured data. And this is the rise that we're seeing. Now, there's 2 types of sources. There's machine generated, and then there's people generated. And we'll talk about that in a second. But things like satellite imagery, scientific data, surveillance information, for example, sensor data. Listen, we're going to start seeing things like smart cities and new kinds of connected systems, and all of this is going to create unstructured data. Now, when you take a look at this kind of model, you have to also understand that we as people create information as well. So text files, emails, social media, websites, mobile data, for example, business applications all create unstructured data as well. Now, just to kind of give you a quick perspective here, unstructured data can literally come in any kind of form. An email, right? There's no real structure to it. 1 or 2 or 5 different emails are not really ever going to be the same, as opposed to structured data. Think of like a database, like an Excel spreadsheet, for example, something really, really simple where you can sort of forecast, how the data is structured, and how it's actually going to be working. So all of this information, this unstructured data that we're going to be creating, is very valuable because it tells us, what are you looking at? How are you interacting with a customer? How are you interacting with a market or a product potentially? Which market segment can we impact? What are people actually talking about on social media? So all of this data, as you can imagine, social media beyond anything, is really, really critical. But it also creates a few challenges. Now, this is something that I've seen in designing things like cloud and data center solutions, working with things like converged and hyper-converged architectures. Data can be a bit of a pain point. And again, mainly because there's so much of it, and people are trying to figure out how do we ingest all of it, and how do we appropriately live in this data-driven world. So some of the challenges that I've seen start off with silos. The silos of information and sometimes data and infrastructure, and silos are not fun because sometimes you forget about them. Sometimes they aren't optimized potentially, and sometimes these silos just don't work very well with other kinds of initiatives. So how do you ingest data if it's sitting in a silo? How do you potentially quarantine it, or maybe analyze it or integrate with other kinds of systems? So silos, especially when they're dormant or not integrated with the rest of the infrastructure, can be a bit of a challenge. And part of the challenge, well, it's management, right? Reactive management around data architecture, time spent managing the actual infrastructure. So you're talking about physical standalone servers, distributed environments. How much time are you actually spending putting out fires rather than actually planting seeds for the business, right? So you need an ecosystem that can support both data functionality as well as simplified management. And a lot of times, guys, we get lost in the management sphere, right? We forget how much time we spend managing this stuff until we kind of have this eye-opening moment when everything becomes easier and actually focus on the workloads that you're supporting. Security is another one. And listen, I don't want to spend time on this. You know that in a data-driven world, security is It's huge. You've seen the breaches. You've read about them. I'm sure you can read about them some more. But poor data management can lead to some serious security issues. And I can't stress this enough. And please understand, it's not just a breach, right? In a world where slow is the new down, an outage, a lost repository, inaccessibility by the user, these are not only potentially security risks, they are very detrimental to the business as well. So don't think about it just from a data loss perspective, also think about it from a resiliency and data protection perspective as well. Another big one is capacity. Too often I've seen racks and racks of pizza box servers run out of space, right? Or run out of storage because maybe it wasn't the right kind of storage architecture, or you just simply couldn't add additional nodes to help yourself scale, so you're forced to go into things like the cloud or a different kind of co-location where maybe those aren't the right answers. A bad design means less capability to scale, and you will have more impacts on users. So if you're dealing with data, again, it could be anything from, ingesting various types of data sources from social media content to analyzing emails to integrating emails into Salesforce, for example, so you can actually autonomously inject this data into your Salesforce engine. A lot of this is going to require capacity and your ability to process all this information. Finally, honestly, one of the most important points, your ability to integrate. So things like integrating with cloud to do data protection, resiliency, backing up to the cloud, doing things like big data and data analytics. If you're challenged when working with silos, your management is poor, you don't have ecosystems, you're going to run into a challenge of integrating with new kinds of emerging solutions out there, and that could absolutely slow down your business. So when it comes to working with data and all of these new kinds of environments, I've really, really enjoyed working with a new kind of architecture. I mean, it's been around for a while, but really working with data, it's amazing. So Converged Architecture, I know everyone's heard about it. And a lot of folks have actually had a chance to play with it and work with it. But by far, for virtualization, data, unstructured data, certainly the vast amount of information that I've seen, I love working with a really cool converged architecture. And I want to kind of point this out there. We recently did this AppCom State of the Data Center report. And in that report, beyond any other technology, IT organizations are looking at really flash storage and converged architecture to support some of the most advanced use cases out there. 37% said they're going to be using some type of converged architecture to support a data-driven initiative. I mean, that's huge, right? These are organizations that are realizing very, very quickly that, listen, traditional legacy ways of managing data, they're not going to work, and they really aren't. And especially if you're trying to become a part of this digitally native world, working with a good converged architecture can give you some really, really big benefits, especially for your business. Let me build this out here really quick. So first of all, operational excellence, right? Cloud-ready scale, improved data control and resiliency, and especially disaster recovery capabilities. You have an economic value to the business. Please don't think this is only technology related. Your IT and technology and business leaders can absolutely reap the benefits of working with a system that's highly scalable. I mean, literally, you just need to add another node if you have more virtual machines or more data that you need to process. So it increases that level of automation with single-click VM, data repository, even extending into a cloud levels of automation. And then obviously for the business, you're able to support more users. You can launch entire business units quickly. You can respond to the market a lot faster. And again, that's your ability to actually work with different kinds of data sources and actually process them. Now, in the real world, where I've seen this stuff deployed, obviously virtualization is amazing. I love converged architecture for virtualization, but also, again, working with VMs, processing engines, and certainly working with data. So there's some big reasons why leaders are using this kind of architecture. And maybe this is kind of, resonating with you guys, or you guys are seeing this and saying, you know what, this is a great approach for this. So multi-tenancy for enterprise data solutions, less space, faster performance, predictable metrics, and again, predictable expansion as well, where you can integrate multiple data points and sources. Here's another big one. Linear scale for critical data sets, scaling around performance, capacity, like I talked about a little bit earlier, making sure that you remove performance bottlenecks, because again, you have one ecosystem that's supporting all of your data, virtual machine, application requirements. And again, you're able to integrate with virtualization solutions and certainly cloud. And this last one, that's a big one, right? Data availability and resilience. Remember, not just losing data, because listen, time out. It's very important. You want to make sure you don't have any sort of data loss or poorly secured repositories, but also availability and resiliency. You can't have repositories go down. You certainly can't lose an entire data store because that's going to impact everything that runs within your business. So dynamic uptime and resiliency, improved capabilities around data distribution, and obviously being able to support more critical data functions. So in the real world, there's some really, really wonderful use cases that I've seen. Everything from consolidation, application delivery, working with big data and analytics, very specified workload and user groups, segmenting those environments for compliance, visibility, obviously multi-tenancy, onboarding new locations, obviously extending into cloud. So take a second here, right? Think about your own environment. Let's just kind of think about what you've got in your ecosystem. Maybe you have some levels of convergence. Maybe you have some pizza box servers, not calling them that because that's just what they look like. Maybe you have towers, whatever the case might be. And in a lot of situations, we get complacent, right? We think that these environments are working, but you got to ask the question, is it actually bringing you value into your ecosystem? Sometimes it's simply not. And just because, I'm using air quotes, I know you can't see, just because it works doesn't mean it's actually helping your business out. So you need to think about these use cases. Now, I'm going to give you guys a little bit more of a bit of a secret here. Getting started doesn't have to be scary. I love doing proof of concepts and trials where we'll literally get a physical box into a data center, put some really cool stuff on it, test it out, make sure it drives. And to be honest, when it comes to a good converged use case, sometimes that box just simply doesn't leave. You put it into production and it continues to work. Again, there's really great ways that you can sort of dip your toe into the world of convergence and deploy it properly. Now, when you do, there's good best practices to kind of approach and follow. And again, can't wait for Sean to jump in here to showcase some of his experience in working with these kinds of solutions. Always plan out your resources and use case. None of this is finite, right? Sizing, capacity planning are an absolute must because I've seen, how do I say this? I've seen converged architecture solutions go south, mainly because of improper sizing, right? You have to get an entire new converged infrastructure box because maybe you didn't get enough stuff in there or you didn't have capacity, for example. So be sure to plan this stuff out. And then obviously make sure you have growth factors considered in prior to deployment. And please understand, I'm not talking about 24 to 36 months. Because of the growth of data, our digital economy, you guys listening, your customers and end users are obviously becoming a lot more connected. You kind of sort of have to plan up to 5, sometimes even 10 years out. Now, please don't yell at me for saying you have to plan out IT environments 10 years out. Here come the questions and answers and comments. But I'm seeing some organizations absolutely try and forecast as far out as they can to make sure that they can actually architect a solution end-to-end and integrate their other kinds of architectural components within their data center. Finally, integration is really, really going to be important as well. In that sense, when you take a look at APIs, cloud integration, there's some really, really cool things you can do as far as services, interconnecting cloud converged systems, creating your own hybrid cloud environment, being able to scale out critical data points for things like data protection. Again, really, really great things you can do in terms of cloud as a complement to your ecosystem. Again, it's not really there to replace anything. And then finally, management. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. I've seen too often people spending time putting out fires, working through really sort of complex UI and menus and trying to create the right policies. It shouldn't be difficult, right? If your underlying ecosystem is strong, your management should be strong as well. Don't sacrifice one for the other. And in that sense, you can really create a powerful, proactive approach to your entire platform, to set alarms, set alerts, making sure that you have enough capacity, even integrating things like security in there to follow and find anomalous traffic within your entire platform. Again, that's when you start to throw in some things like SDN and network functions virtualization. And you can obviously tie in other data center management platform and solutions to get that complete visibility. So again, we talked about a lot here, right? In terms of understanding convergence beyond anything else, it's critical to know that, there's solutions out there, and certainly I love convergent, hyper-converged platforms for data processing purposes, and especially with the amount of unstructured data that we're experiencing every single day. But now I kind of want to bring in Sean here because, I'm so curious to hear about some of the solutions that make this a possibility and actually see them in action. Before I pass it off to Sean, remember, we do have time for Q&A at the very end. So we love an interactive audience. There's no question too silly. So by all means, go ahead and pop that in the Q&A. I'll be checking that out throughout the conversation. And then at the very end, I'll bring Sean back here to have a little bit of a chat here with you guys. But without any further ado, to talk about some of these scale-out converged solutions that solve these data protection and storage challenges, Sean, I'm excited to bring you in. The floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And welcome, everybody, and good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're calling in from. Appreciate the commentary, Bill, because a lot of what you've discussed is something that we here at StorageCraft have been focusing on. And myself personally, being in the storage industry for more than 20 years, there is the old adage that is, as much as things change, they still stay the same. And I would venture to say that the vast majority of people on the call today are still trying to manage more storage, spend less time doing it, and spend less money actually accomplishing and delivering better service level objectives to their business to support the growth of the applications. And so that's actually one of the things that for the last 20 years people have been trying to improve upon. But here at StorageCraft, we've taken a different approach than I think what many people on the webinar today have seen in the past, in that we are delivering a converged solution for storage management and data protection that's built on a unique architecture. So traditionally, the legacy architectures are built on block stores and RAID, LUNs, and volumes, which many people are familiar with. And they present files and folders via either block or file protocols, right? Nothing unique here. This is the way it's been for 3 decades. However, there are new opportunities for different architectures to provide better services to applications, and that's actually an object store. And so this object store is actually a technology that many cloud providers use, Amazon and Google and Azure and others, to really provide large-scale storage deployments. However, those large-scale storage deployments that are hosted in the cloud are not on-premises. They're not in your data center. They don't support the general applications, whether it be unstructured data, file serving, email, et cetera, that many people have requirements for. And so what we've done here at StorageCraft is we've actually built our own object store that sits, if you will, underneath the covers, but it looks like scale-out network-attached storage. So we actually present different microservices, and depending upon the converged deployment option that you look for, we can deliver either file system access, NFS and SMB, where literally you can drop this in, and we just look like an SMB share for your applications, or we just look like an NFS data store to VMware. But underneath the covers is actually an object store. We also have the converged architecture to support data protection services that actually run in the cluster and provide protection for physical and virtual servers. And if you look at those microservices there on the top there, the unique part of what we do is that every file or VM that we protect is actually decomposed into an object and stored in an object store. And that affords us a lot of opportunities to scale out and be dynamic to your changing business needs, but also additional application requirements that come down the road 3 and 6 months after your acquisition. Despite the 5 to 10 year planning you may do, there are things that are always unexpected that you have to react to. And so our architecture for OneSafe is something that delivers a lot of flexibility as we can layer on additional value-added software, where we're able to provide services for not only just scale-out storage for the traditional, here's a terabyte of storage for this genome sequencing application, right? But we also do inline dedupe and compression. And for all the unstructured data that you have in your organization that you're storing in OneSafe, we actually do continuous data protection. So we're taking snapshots every 90 seconds. So at any point in time, you can go back and recover information at a very granular level, but also make sure that information is stored in the cluster in a safe manner, so that if you actually have a failed disk drive, all the information is encrypted at rest. But one of the big things I mentioned at the beginning was everybody in the call is probably trying to manage more storage and spend less time doing it. And that's one of the advantages that we have in not requiring RAID or LUN or volumes, and that you don't have to allocate storage to a particular application. You can change your way of thinking about managing storage in a converged fashion and think about really just a pool of storage that can be used for unstructured data, it can be used for VMware, it can be used for disaster recovery as a backup target, and a converged solution for your physical and virtual servers. And you have the flexibility to choose how you want to protect that information. Are you going to protect it on premises? Are you going to replicate it off-site? But in any fashion, regardless of the deployment model, you have the opportunity to scale out non-disruptively. So that planning exercise that you do your best to achieve, as things change, you can add storage over time. And as everybody knows, the cost of storage on a dollar per terabyte basis is decreasing quarter over quarter. And so as you have the opportunity to actually bring your own drives with our solution, that cost that you're going to be spending quarter over quarter is probably going to be declining. Right? Now, depending upon the data growth rate, that may outpace the price decline, but you have that flexibility to have a zero configuration opportunity to scale out storage and grow with your business. And the software that I've been just describing here actually runs across our product family. So the same software runs across these three models. Two of the models are actually hard drive based, more oriented to unstructured data, video repositories, archiving, CAD/CAM file sharing, those types of things. But you also have the opportunity on the far right side with the 5410 to use that in an all-flash manner so that you actually have the opportunity to have high-performing CAD/CAM files. So if you're doing like PLM in the automotive industry or genome sequencing and you want to stream large amounts of sequence data where it's terabytes per run, you may need the performance of all-flash. And so the same software that we have runs across these different models, so you can actually pick and choose based upon the application requirements. Do you need capacity? Do you need performance? Do you need a blend? And you can determine how you want to do that. But in all cases, it's managed the same way. And so when you take a look at kind of the different deployment and different use cases, and Bill touched on the significant pain points of the unstructured data piece, there is also the opportunity about how do you protect a growing number of VMs and or physical servers and actually keep up with how you can deliver an SLA to your business based upon the priority of those virtual machines. And I'll get into a little bit more about what we're doing for the data protection side in a moment, but then also both primary and secondary storage for virtual servers and unstructured data. But the good news is that what we've done here at StorageCraft is try to make it as easy for you to manage storage and data protection as possible and spend the least amount of money. And so the same solution can be used for different purposes, and you can absolutely stand up different clusters in different data centers and different co-location environments based upon where the applications are. But delivering a converged solution that offers the opportunity to take advantage of data protection and storage is something that we've been working on over the last couple of years with StorageCraft's acquisition of Exablocks. And that's really where we are now able to provide you with the opportunity to protect applications via both agent and agentless fashion, so tying directly into VMware's APIs for data protection of the snapshot. You can have more granular protection by deploying an agent in those VMs, and similarly for Hyper-V, right? But not only Hyper-V and VMware, as well as the physical servers. And this is where StorageCraft has, for the last 13 years, been protecting millions and millions of physical and virtual servers throughout the world. But probably one of the most significant advantages that we can deliver is your ability to recover those applications in as short a time as you have budget for. And I'll get into that in just a minute, but this is where virtual boot, as we call it, where we have multiple patents around this to allow you to recover any VM in milliseconds. And that VM is booting up and then subsequently being available for your application. As well as the opportunity to take a look at the different deployment models I was mentioning, right? So data protection is one thing. But if you take a look at the portfolio of what everybody has in their infrastructure, it's not just backup and recovery, and it's not just storage, right? And it's not just one physical server or a variety of virtual server hosts. So with our solutions, you can actually decide, based upon where you are and where your priorities are, how you want to use the storage, whether it be for primary storage on the left-hand side. And that primary storage can be for VMware, but it could also be for just all of the unstructured data that your users depend on, right? That primary copy of unstructured data that is then protected and backed up. You can also look at opportunities for the converged secondary data protection, where you can use a OneSafe cluster as the repository for VMware or Hyper-V for those physical servers. And then if you continue to look to the right-hand side of this slide, you have the opportunity to determine, based upon your business continuity and DR requirements, do you want to replicate that to another OneSafe cluster in a colo, right? Do you want to replicate that into StorageCraft's cloud, where we have the full DR as a service capabilities to recover application data, network services, and provide that back to your users on premises. Or you want to go to a third-party cloud like Amazon for just storage repository, right? So multiple deployment options for you to take advantage of, because the same software runs across all of our models, hard drive and all flash. You can actually enable different services simply by adding subscriptions or adding capabilities to what in hardware and the appliances you invest in today. So it's very flexible in terms of what and how you want to protect that information, particularly about how you're going to manage it through OneSystem. OneSystem is our cloud-based management service. This enables you to manage your storage globally. So regardless of where those OneSafe clusters are physically located, as long as they have network connectivity to OneSystem, you have global visibility into your entire environment. Capacity planning, storage utilization, disk drive health information, different alerts and so forth are all monitored not only by you as the administrator, but also by StorageCraft. One of the significant advantages that we've had from the beginning back in 2012 when we first began to ship OneSafe for, at that time, OneBlocks, is OneSystem provided that global visibility so that you're able to know what is the state of my infrastructure. For example, I know the state of every disk drive and power supply for all OneSafe deployed at all of our customers worldwide. Right? And that global visibility and cloud-based management is something that extends a lot of flexibility for you as an administrator to make it easy for you to manage storage and data protection and spend as little time as possible. At the same time, you'll see this in just a minute when I jump into the demonstration here in just a moment, but most of the things, and I'll say like literally 99% of the things that you are going to do as an administrator to either manage data protection or storage is all point and click. It's all cloud-based management. There are no command line operations that are required for you to set up snapshots or to set up remote replication, changing a LUN size or a volume size. All that goes away because of our object store. It affords you a lot of opportunities to not only manage storage, but also recover those VMs that you're protecting very quickly. And this is just a slide here on virtual boot, and I'll show you the recovery process live in just a moment here. But this is actually something that using OneSafe as a backup recovery target for your physical or virtual environment, this is where we have multiple patents, and actually 2 years ago at VMworld, we won Best in Show for this technology that allows you to recover a virtual machine of any size from OneSafe back to your primary data store. However, this is different than what most of you are used to with instant recovery or doing a recovery and then a storage vMotion. This doesn't require any storage vMotion activities. The VM that you're going to recover will literally begin to boot up in less than a second. Once that application is running on VMware, it's going to look like it's going to the primary data store that it was getting its data from before. However, our patents allow it to actually get the data from OneSafe. And as it reads and modifies and writes new data, that's all going to the primary data store. So the recovery process of moving data from the backup target, OneSafe, to the primary storage happens in the background. And then at the end of it, everything is moved over to the primary data store. So the application doesn't know that anything has changed. It thinks it continues to access the data directly from the primary data store. Well, we're doing the recovery in the background, and then you're done. There's no additional steps to do another storage vMotion after that recovery process. That data is available immediately for those applications. So there have been a couple questions that have come in through chat, and I'm going to hold off on that just based upon the flow of the demonstration here. And so I'm going to take a look, and we'll flip over here in just a second. I'm going to share my screen now. And everybody should see OneSystem here in just a moment. Main dashboard that is the converged solution for both data protection and storage management. And so you can actually see here at the overall top level what the overall system health is. This is OneSystem. You can say we have a communication error. So this is our test environment. We've obviously introduced some interesting things here to show as opposed to normal operations. But you're also able to see at a very high level how many unprotected machines are in your environment, physical and virtual, what the protection status of those machines are, what the storage and data usage is, and change rates, et cetera. So this is at a high level. So I'm just going to kind of go through a couple things on the storage side as well as the data protection. So one of the things I mentioned is that we've kept it very straightforward and easy to use, and that's one of the things that we've been able to do with managing storage, and that you can actually create shares and make them available for your users literally in a few clicks. So here I'm going to just go ahead and create an IT Pro share, and I'm going to choose the cluster that I want to create that share on, and I'm going to leave it just SMB, just for easy access here. And then you can actually choose different storage policies. So based upon our architecture, you can choose the type of deduplication, whether it be variable length or fixed length, whether it be compression is enabled or disabled, right, based on the type of data. And if it's unstructured video files, no need to compress that, right? The app is doing that. However, if it's virtual servers or if it's a backup recovery application in a converged fashion, go ahead and enable compression. And then you also have the opportunity to determine how long you want those snapshots to be retained. The snapshots happen every 90 seconds, I mentioned, but you can actually define a custom value of, okay, those snapshots are happening every 90 seconds, and they're kept for the first hour, then hourly for the first day, and daily for the first week, and weekly forever. But how long do you actually want to keep that data? Because all these snapshots are immutable. And this is important from a ransomware and a recovery perspective. When you're doing backup or the primary storage for unstructured data, all those snapshots can't be deleted by ransomware. They can't even be deleted by your users or the administrators of OneSystem, right? The only question is how long do you want to keep them, right? And so this can be changed at over any given period of time. And then once you're done, you just hit create, and now you have a share called IT Pro. Okay? So I'm going to hold off on the share. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. I wanted to show everybody about the data protection policies. And this is something that is different than what I think most of you are used to administering your data protection, in that at a high level you can actually see what the data protection policies are. And here I have 4 different policies, high, medium, low, and agent-based, that are protecting different numbers of machines, right? My medium policy is protecting 105 machines. And I can click into this, and I'll see exactly which 105 machines those are. But I also see at a high level, what did I call, when I created my high priority policy, what did that actually mean? So now at a very high level, I can see the retention period for the 10 days of snapshots that are happening every 15 minutes. And then I've got a recovery point daily, 8 weekly, and 12 monthly, right? And if I want to modify this at any point in time, I can very easily do so just by saying, okay, let's actually keep, instead of 12, let's go to 30 days, right? I'm not going to go ahead and change these policies, but that's how you would do that, edit that policy. And now, at the same point in time, if I was to edit this policy for the medium priority or medium priority, any policy change would be automatically applied to all 110 machines, right? So it's very easy to create policies. I can create a new one here, and let's do IT Pro. And let's take snapshots every 30 minutes. And I'm going to have this target, right? And so from a converged perspective, I'm going to choose the OneSafe, and that is where the data protection services are running on the cluster. So it's a very efficient communication between this cluster, the OneSafe cluster, and VMware. And now I can determine what my recovery points are. I'm just going to leave the default for illustration purposes. But if I want to replicate this off-site, I can replicate this to another OneSafe cluster, or I can go to our cloud, right? You can also go to Amazon S3 if you have an account set up that way. But I'm going to go ahead and just create this to our cloud, and then you can determine the interval. I'm going to replicate daily, right? And you can go ahead and save this. I'm not going to save it, well, I'll go ahead and save it. That's fine. Now, once you define a policy, it's very straightforward to actually assign that policy to the different machines that you want to protect. So now here under the protections portion of OneSystem, I'm going to be able to see all of the machines that are registered with vCenter and or Hyper-V. Okay? So you can see I have a number of desktops that are protected via agent-based. These are actually low priority. Down here are the agent policies where I have an agent installed on my VMs in Hyper-V. But if I want to apply this to, let's say, my CentOS systems, I can actually now search very quickly all the VMs that have the CentOS, and I can apply and assign a given policy to those, right? And then from there, the backups begin, and I'm able to see from a status perspective which machines are protected via what policy. So that's how you actually assign an SLA-based data protection policy to actually back up the data. What about recovering it? I mentioned earlier virtual boot, and that's one of the capabilities that we have for full system-level recovery. You can do file-level recovery as well, but from a system-level perspective, this is where I can, again, search my different VMs that I'm protecting, This one here is my Linux one. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And now from here, I have all the different recovery points, right? Remember my SLA-based data protection policy? I'm keeping some number of hourly or 30-minute or 15-minute and dailies. So I can go back and choose a given recovery point. Here I'm just going to go and choose the most recent, right? But you also have the opportunity, whoops, let me jump back one second, to choose where you'd like to recover that system from, right? Optimal is going to choose the most recent at the closest storage, but if you want to go to your remote cluster or a different target, or if this policy actually incorporates StorageCraft's DR as a service opportunity for replicating into our cloud, you can do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and just leave it as optimal and then click that recovery point. So now I'm going to have an instant restore from vSphere. I can choose which host I want it to go to. I can choose what data store that primary storage should be using, and you can determine if your primary data store was this to begin with, you can do that as well. You can assign memory and CPU. If you want to have that VM up and live, obviously give it a network adapter, and now you can click Next, right? And that's actually going to recover that application and begin to do that, and that VM will begin to boot up in less than a second, okay? If I want to do file recovery, you can go in here and you can dig into a given VM or unstructured data and begin to protect that information. So I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to come back here to OneSafe. Now remember I created those shares. I created a share called IT Pro. For those of you that have been in storage and managing your environment, many of you are not able to do and set up remote replication in 3 mouse clicks, right? One of the things that we have the opportunity to do with OneSafe in this converged architecture is actually decide on a per share basis how you want to protect that information. So for this, and what kind of storage policy you want to assign, I'm going to replicate this IT Pro to another cluster. And so here, under there, I can just click Replicate, and now I can choose my target cluster, and I click Next. Now, if I'm on the same network, I just leave this open, right? Or if you have a network where you need to go through a firewall and traverse those external ports, you can set that up. But this is something that now I click Finish and I'm done. So in 3 mouse clicks, I just created a replicated share for all data that's being written to IT Pro that will be replicated to the other OneSafe cluster. And I can begin to see my replication that's begun. And then over here, you'll eventually see your RPO for that read-only target cluster. So those are the things I wanted to show in terms of managing storage as well as managing the data protection. The last piece before we jump back is the analytics side of things. So it's great to know that your applications are being backed up, but how are they doing? Are you in compliance with what your goals are, right? And so looking at, as an example, the protection analytics here, this is what it will actually show you over a time-based series. Are those policies that you have created, are they being met? Are you able to back up the VMs every 15 minutes, or are there gaps in what you're looking for? And so here is a very easy way to look and see. Now, this is an environment we just stood up in QA here, but this is where you'll see on a daily basis, there were 10 recovery points were expected, 9 of them were received. And so you're a little bit out of compliance, right? You can drill in and see which ones actually failed. But over time, you'll start to see nice charts here where you see how many of those jobs, those recovery points were achieved or missed, and you can see which systems were vulnerable, right? So you can see here, this one, no recovery points were received for my Hyper-V VM. So I want to go and dig into that and see how to solve that. So analytics is all about giving you the information to make better decisions and to report back to your business about what you're doing. And so that's OneSystem. That's how you manage the converged storage solution. And as I mentioned before, there are different deployment options based upon what you'd like to see. And so the last thing I want to touch on is the last 2 use cases for the primary storage for virtual servers. OneSafe is VM ready. So yes, you can use both the hard drive as well as the all-flash solution for that. Depending upon your performance and price point, the all-flash solution can be very advantageous. And one of the things that we also have customers using our all-flash for is not only for VMware, but as high recovery and high-speed recovery for backup for backing up those VMs, right? Where just as a list price for about 38 terabytes of all-flash, you're looking at a list price of about $40,000. Once you take into account deduplication and compression, obviously that dollar per terabyte increases in your favor, where capacity can be 3 to 1, 5 to 1. That data reduction can actually improve that. The other thing with VMware that's advantageous is, with an NFS data store, you don't have the terabyte or LUN limitation of 2 terabytes. I'm going to create 8 of them, and I'm going to have 16 terabytes, right? You can actually maximize your NFS data store size, and VMware supports up to 64 terabytes, and it allows you to scale as you need without reconfiguring how many LUNs you're going to assign to a given data store and those VMDKs to the data store, right? You can think of this really as a pool of storage that VMs have access to, and you can have any size file that the VM is writing to us, as well as the largest data store that VMware supports. From a primary storage perspective, particularly for unstructured data here, right? Again, the same idea about defining the storage policy on a per-share basis, but this is one of the things that from a ransomware perspective that is advantageous. Unfortunately, a number of our customers have been infected with ransomware, but fortunately they've all been able to recover their information. And this applies not only to the mapped network drives, but also we've had customers. There's a large major hotel in New York City that had their VDI environment compromised. So all the user files were stored on one blocks. They were all actually compromised. But not only was Nimble not able to get those snapshots back, but all their Beam backups were also compromised. Now, fortunately, the Beam backups were written to one blocks as well. And so because of our immutable snapshots, we went back to yesterday's, in this case it was yesterday's version of the BBK prior to the infection, and the administrator was able to get back all the backups of the other VMs that are running the hotel, in addition to getting all of the unstructured data to the mapped network drive. So it's not just files, it can also be backups that could be compromised. Jason Rolla at Christopher Rural Health had the same incident, and being in the medical field, in the healthcare industry, there's a dollar per record that the hospital is exposed to if they are compromised, and they do have to be recovered from ransomware, right? If they have to pay the fees. So there's some significant downsides to that based upon your vertical, but with the immutable snapshots, there are a number of advantages there. A couple of questions have come in about command line as well as APIs available. And at this point, we don't have APIs available for administrators to write custom scripts or custom integration with third-party applications. There are the typical SNMP monitoring and traps, but as far as a full API that's available for third-party software integration, that's not something that we're able to do at this point. Looking through here, a couple of other questions, and before I turn it back to you, Bill, let's see, Nutanix hypervisor. So there's a question here about Nutanix hypervisor. So we don't protect Nutanix today from a data protection, from an agentless perspective. There are opportunities to use our agents within different physical servers as well as VM, and we do integrate with vCenter. So in OneSystem, I didn't go through the whole setup based upon in the demonstration based on the time that we had, but within OneSystem, once you enter the vCenter credentials, we automatically discover all the VMs that are registered and found within vCenter. So you'll very quickly see which VMs are unprotected that somebody spun up today that they haven't applied a policy for, a data protection policy for. So those types of things are something that we are integrated with vCenter for discovery and protection of those applications. So I'm going to pause on a couple of the other applications, the other questions, and turn it back to you, Bill.
Thank you so much, John. You stole all my thunder there with answering those questions, but good job. You answered the hard ones, which I appreciate. Again, folks, we've got about like 10 minutes or so for more Q&A, and as you can see, we've got a very interactive audience, so by all means, go ahead and pop those into the Q&A, and we'll get a chance to talk about those in just a little bit. So, Sean, as you take a deep breath here, I'm going to ask you a bit of a question here. So a lot of times, folks get a chance to work with, how do we say it, heterogeneous environments, right? And in this case, sometimes you might have, different types of clusters. Is that supported? Do you support heterogeneous clusters for maybe like different kinds of use cases? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is one of the things that we do support heterogeneous clusters. It's heterogeneous within the family, if you will. So, for example, the hard drive-based OneSafe models, the 4412 and 4417, you can combine those in the same cluster. And then the all-flash, our prior, the 5210 and 5410 models can be in the same cluster. Going forward, this is one of the things that's important from an investment protection perspective is that, for the hardware that you would buy today as an administrator and you deploy, let's say, 500 terabytes, right? And then 2 or 3 years from now, you're adding more storage and you're adding more nodes to your cluster. But eventually, I refresh the hardware, right? So there's a new model, the 4517. I'm making that up, right? You can then add that 4517, the new model, to the existing cluster. And provided you have enough capacity, when you're ready to retire the hardware that you bought 3 years ago, you simply evacuate that node. And because we're an object store underneath the covers, those objects we can move anywhere we need to in the cluster. And so we just move them off of the hardware that you're going to retire. And when that's done, you get a notification. You literally just unplug the old hardware, and your applications and users don't know that anything has changed. They just are now running on the new hardware in the cluster.
So you're recommending people just unplug hardware? I'm kidding. Please don't unplug hardware until you're ready to do so. That's
I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it, but we do protect against an entire node failure. So you can use 17 drives and be okay.
Oh my God! Good to know. Good to know. Let's kind of keep on the subject of data protection. We've got a question around deduplication and compression as far as what you guys do with that and how you work with it. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. I oftentimes get the question, okay, well, can I turn deduplication off? And the answer is no. It's actually inherent in our architecture, right? So everything that's written to the cluster, we break up into segments, and it's just a question about what type of deduplication. So if it's a backup application where you might have files that are offset by 1 bit, you want to use a variable length, right? Because then we'll still pick up the pattern and be able to provide that deduplication compared to fixed length, which is most unstructured data. If you're doing video repositories, if you're doing digital asset management, if you're doing CAD/CAM or PLM-based applications, go ahead and use a fixed length for that because those files aren't going to be offset and you'll still get the dedupe there. Compression, you just decide you can turn that on or off based upon the type of data. There's a little bit of overhead, a couple percent of CPU is spent doing that, but it's not terrible. So it's definitely something you can use if you have any type of data that could be compressed. But overall, you get to take advantage of the data reduction and compression. There's no rehydration penalty, right? Because everything is an object. We're going to go and get, if you write out a megabyte file, we're going to get the 50 objects that make up that file and just deliver it back to the application. So you don't have the typical data domain rehydration penalty because we're an object store as opposed to a LUN-based block store.
Man, that's so cool. You had me at all flash on object storage built on an intelligent array. That is just sounds awesome. I think that's so cool. Hey, Sean, I'm going to tell you this. Everyone's curious about protection here as far as data is concerned. So let's kind of stay on this topic just a little bit longer. We've got somebody asking here. So this customer, this person does a lot of data ingestion and processing. And they're very concerned about data protection. So can StorageCraft scale into the cloud? Can they leverage a cloud option for data recovery purposes?
Yeah, certainly. And that's a very common request in that we have, we don't know how much the application is going to be running. We have some ideas, but how do we size this, right? And so with our architecture, you can start with what you need. And you can actually start with as little as a single node and provide a data protection on premises. And then you can actually replicate that to another cluster or to our cloud. And the advantage here when you're replicating to our cloud is it's not just the data that's being replicated. It's the data that's being replicated, but also an infrastructure that's available for you to recover that data in our cloud and run the application in our cloud and provide services back to your users that are on premises, right? So that workflow, you can actually recover it, in tens of minutes, a large VM or a large number of VMs in our cloud and provide those services back to your users. And when you're ready to fail back to your premises, from our cloud back on premises, use that same virtual boot recovery methodology that I described to do local recovery. That also dramatically helps with the fall back and fail back methodology to get the data back into your data center.
You know, I want to kind of stay on this. Give me some scenarios, man. How long would it take to recover, like a workload or two? Give me some different kind of, you know, whether it's a storage repository or a VM. How long does it take to recover locally as well as for like remote replication?
Yeah, well, locally it's going to be dependent upon, you know, hard drive or all flash solution, right? And the all flash is certainly going to go faster because you can think about basically, you know, you're going to be limited by the performance of the application getting access to the data. And so if you have, you know, a solution that's going to do 100 megabytes a second of streaming workloads or a couple thousand IOPS versus, you know, multiple hundreds of megabytes per second of streaming all flash and, you know, 20, 30,000 IOPS, those are going to be different recovery metrics. But the time to boot, the time for the VM to begin booting, that all happens in literally, you know, less than a second. In the cloud, it depends on how many VMs you have a dependency upon, right? So if you're going to recover your domain controller and then AD and then email, you could have multiple steps in there. But you're talking tens of minutes, maybe half an hour. It's not hours.
Wow, that's really cool. So you can do some pretty cool things as far as structuring your mean time between your recovery and your recovery time objectives based on the workload and how you guys actually work with the recovery process. So you can do some really cool forecasting with that. That's awesome. So another question here. We talked a lot around OneSafe and the design that you guys have been working on that. So when adding an additional OneSafe to a cluster, how much downtime is involved, or is there any downtime?
Yeah, there actually is not any downtime, and that's one of the things that whether you're adding, you know, drives to a node or adding multiple nodes in a cluster, there are no command line operations you have to do. You literally plug in the new node into the cluster, and presumably it's not going to be on the same network. Obviously, a requirement to be on the same network to be in the same cluster. Once that's done, they actually auto-discover each other. And so from there, it's literally 2 mouse clicks. You open up the browser that points to the OneSafe that you're adding, and you see the cluster that it discovered, and you literally click join, and you're done. And from there, your applications never knew that anything has changed other than they now see more storage. Because again, thinking about things differently, as I started out at the beginning, as much as things change, they stay the same, right? You've got a problem about how do you provision storage? Well, this way we made it very easy to think about a pool of storage that all the applications have equal access to. Now you can set some quotas, but if you don't set quotas, every application has equal access to that capacity. So you don't have to worry about, well, how big should I size this line and how much storage am I wasting by applications not using what I've already allocated to them.
So, Sean, I want to ask one last question here. And, you know, everyone on the line, thanks for sticking around here. And by the way, if we didn't answer your question, we're going to get a chance to, you know, pass your information off to Sean, and he'll do it himself there. He'll respond to you a little bit later. So here's the thing, right? We all in the industry talk about data, right? Right now, we actually talked about something pretty specific, and I think that's awesome, object storage and unstructured data. We've got a question here. A big challenge for this guy is, you know, poor performance around legacy gear, and they're super concerned because they have different systems about the migration. They want to do it, but there's a large amount of data. So maybe you can share with folks here listening your final thoughts and your best practices. How do you approach this, right? As people listening to this are going to be working with new kinds of connected systems that are all going to be generating data, how do you actually start to approach this? Because remember, this is not traditional, you know, bits and bytes and files we're also used to working with. This is a different type of data and information that you need to ingest. So tell us how do you get started with all this? How do you conceptualize it, and where do you begin?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't figured out how to solve the physics problem. So if you've got a ton of data to move, it's going to take some time. But having said that, I think it'll depend upon what the source and the type of data is, right? You could have, you know, if the legacy storage is on VMware and you're looking to move off of, say, an older HDD-based solution where you've got full racks and racks of 10,000 RPM hard drives, you know, that's different in a VMware environment where you can do a storage vMotion, right? And that makes it easier to do. It's still going to take time, clearly depending upon the network and the amount of workload that's being stressed on the primary data store during that vMotion activity. But that's number one. That's kind of the easy one. The second is things like robocopy, right? Third-party copy utilities, and if they're trying to maintain AD permissions, you can do that when you're replicating the data, and then you can go through and make sure that all the files are synced between the two. And during that process, as much time as it's going to take, that primary storage is still accessible, right? So that's and then once that's done, then you make the cutover to us, and that can be VMware is much more seamless through something like robocopy. It's a bit more manual and tedious, but once you get the data moved into OneSafe, you're not going to have to go through forklift upgrades again as you go to next generation hardware over that life cycle of that data, 1, 3, 5, 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense, definitely, and I appreciate that, right? I think at the very beginning you need to get started and just ask the questions around your design, and certainly virtualization helps. It looks like that's all the time that we have. Jen, let me pass it back to you to wrap it up for us.
Okay, great. Yep, we are just about out of time today, but before we go, I'd like to thank StorageCraft for sponsoring today's event, as well as you, Bill, and Sean, for your great presentation. Just a reminder to the audience, the seminar will be available on demand starting tomorrow, so please feel free to come back and review. Have a great day, and thank you for attending.